Good afternoon or good day, wherever you are on the planet. This is Andy Revkin from the Earth Institute at Columbia University. Part two of our Earth Day celebration, joining here about a half hour with George Steinmetz, who's a friend and one of the world's great photographers. I was tweeting about him the other day in the context of Cartier-Bresson, famous French photographer, who was known for capturing the decisive moment. And to me, what George is about is capturing the decisive vantage point and doing whatever it takes to get that vantage point. You've been at this for decades. We have this book that I was invited to write the text for, and an essay called "The Human Planet: Earth at the Dawn of the Anthropocene." In about 30 minutes, we're going to switch to Instagram, where Fred has a massive following and talk to people that way. But Fred, I wanted to just say hi and see how you're doing on this Earth Day first. You were over the city last week. Maybe you could talk about that a little briefly before we look at the book a little bit.
About flying over New York?
Yeah.
Well, I went up in a helicopter on Tuesday, and I photographed the city extensively a few years ago when I did a book on New York from the air, and it was kind of spooky, Andy. The city, it looks kind of dead. I mean, the avenues, the streets are empty. I was there flying over at rush hour, and there were virtually no cars in the Lincoln Tunnel or the George Washington Bridge. It was
incredible.
It was very odd. The only things that were kind of happening was there was a small group of tents by one of the hospitals in Central Park. And there was a big Navy hospital ship berthed on Pier 90. And then the other thing that was kind of happening was that they were interring lots of bodies at Hart Island, unclaimed bodies in boxes in a mass grave, which is kind of a pretty bleak.
Yeah. Had you ever droned or focused on Hart Island before?
Yeah, when I was working on the book, I kind of happened across Hart Island one morning, and they were actually doing interments, which is not an everyday occurrence in regular times. But in these COVID-19 times, I think it's virtually daily that the morgues are a bit overwhelmed right now. So it was they were doing kind of the same process, but just a much higher volume, and they're no longer using prisoners. They used to have prisoners doing the interments, prisoners from Rikers Island, where they paid like below minimum wage to bury the bodies, and apparently they wouldn't. The prison didn't want to do it anymore. They tried upping the wages, and they still didn't want to do it. So now they got a private contractor, and I think I actually had my drone confiscated by NYPD while I was taking effort. They ordered me to bring my drone back and land it and confiscate it because I don't think they wanted people to see what was going on over there.
Yeah, I'm showing some of the video and the drone footage you took. And it's true that in history there's about 1 million bodies buried there. Is that correct?
Yeah, there are about 1 million souls there. It's kind of the Potter's Field, but when you think of Potter's Field, I think of a bunch of kind of blank tombstones. But here you can see it's mass graves. It looks more like to me like a toxic waste dump, like where you would put shallow not nuclear fuels, but like some kind of chemical waste.
Incredible. And so let's go back in your career a little bit then and talk a little bit about how you got going as when did you first take to the skies as a photographer? You could just give a quick sketch of your beginning.
Well, I started, when I was a kid, I liked climbing up trees. I always liked getting an elevated perspective. And when I started to emerge as a professional photographer, that was always the most exciting part of a coverage. Like, if you were doing a story on some kind of land use, they want to climb up a tower, sometimes get up in a small plane. And eventually I started working for National Geographic, and I had a little more money so I could have better aircraft and more control over, where I was in the sky. And eventually I got into this kind of flying. This is me flying a motorized paraglider over the empty Court of Arabia. And I wanted to do I wanted it to explore the Central Sahara, and there were no aircraft available. So I had to bring my own. And the paraglider, it's you can see here, it's a backpack motor, and you have a harness. It's kind of like a folding camp chair that you strapped into, and then the wing is like a parachute or paraglider style wing. And for flying in remote areas, it's really ideal because you can You can put in the back of a car. You can check it as excess baggage. The whole thing fits into about 3 50-pound bags. And I don't need an airfield. I just run to take off and land. With 10 liters of fuel, you can fly for about 2 hours. And you can see here, it's a totally unrestricted view of the world. There's no glass,
Right.
there's no fuselage, there's no pilot to talk to, which is kind of great because it's always, there's a miscommunication or with the pilot, even in your own language, but especially if you're dealing with a foreign language, it's hard to communicate where you want to be. So if I want to see something in a particular place, I just go there, and it's very straightforward.
Yeah, that sounds straightforward. That sounds straightforward, but when you say there's no pilot, you are also the pilot. So how do you deal with being in a device where if you make a wrong decision, you can get in big trouble in a hurry and take great photographs at the same time?
Okay, can you scroll back? You can see, if you scroll back a little bit here, you can see a takeoff. This is in Ethiopia, and I was you're running takeoff. After about like 60 steps, you lift off, and then it's reasonable to do if you fly early in the morning or late in the afternoon, because the air is calm then, and because to take photos with the glider, take quality photos, you have to take your hands off the controls, and
Right.
so you want to be in really chill air. It's kind of like to me, it's kind of like a jet ski, and take pictures of a jet ski, and you could do that. You like on a jet ski, you can kind of stand up and you could lock the throttle and do that, but you want to be in a really glassy lake.
Yeah, but I mean, how many, like you would have a couple cameras around your neck, right? Or
I had one camera. Sometimes I would have two if I want. I had one camera for. I did a lot of this during the film era, and I had one camera that was specialized for panoramas, because you have these big, long landscapes to be really spectacular. So I had a special camera for that, and sometimes I have an extra lens. But you have to run to take off in sand, and you have 100-pound, like about 100 pounds of gear that you're trying to run with in your back, and then you get this camera banging off your chest, and more stuff is more stuff, and so you want to be really minimalist. And sometimes you get too ambitious with your camera gear, and you don't take off, and you don't get a picture. So you gotta balance your photographic zeal with the practicalities of flying.
Yeah, and you've survived most of this. Well, you've survived all of it so far. You're here talking to us now. So, but you've had some close scrapes.
Yeah, I had some bangers, and I even had a splash. I watered in off the coast of Mexico. I was photographing whales, and I got a little bit far from shore, and the motor went on strike, and I got wet. But generally, I mean, there's no, in the U.S., there's no license available. There's no required training. It's kind of, if you want to buy this thing and go do that, just don't take somebody with you. It's considered an experimental aircraft, and so you have to make your own safety rules. And I think it's probably fortunate I got into this when I was about 40 years old, because I was a little more, how shall I say, a little more reasonable than I was when I was younger. And
Right.
So I build in precautions. Like when I was flying in the water, I had somebody following me with a boat and a radio. And most of my flying, with the paraglider, I would take with me an experienced pilot. I went with, most of it was with a Frenchman named Alain Arnoux, who was the world champion. And me and Alain, we went to, I don't know, like a dozen countries, like Libya and Iran and all these crazy places, and flew.
Sorry, I momentarily disconnected there. But you also have a family. So how do they deal with this?
Well, my kids think, I'm kind of the when I do like presentations for the classes, I'm the rad dad. I'm the adventure dude. My wife, she's I have an extraordinary wife, and Lisa has been very patient for me. When I met her in Italy, when I was actually on assignment for the Geographic. So she's a reporter, and she was a reporter. Now she's an editor for the Wall Street Journal. So she understands the reporter's zeal for a story.
Interesting.
And she puts up with it. Yeah, but I don't fly that much anymore. It's not really a matter of age. It's more a matter of the technology's changed, and now a lot of what I'm trying to photograph I can do with the drone.
Right. So that really has changed. things. But does it is it now too easy in a way? There's so much drone photography, so much aerial photography. Is that, I don't know, is that a problem or is that kind of good?
Well, to be frank, it's a problem from a business sense. I mean, I used to have something of a monopoly between 50 feet and 400 feet. I kind of owned that airspace. Nobody was flying helicopters or planes at those altitudes. And I mean, I didn't have a lot of competition in, flying in Algeria either. But when people would see a low altitude picture in a publication, it was mine. But now with drones, anybody with $1,000 can buy a cheap drone and get pretty good pictures from the air. I mean, I like to think that I can do things a little bit better, but it's kind of done for photography what camera phones have. I mean, I think camera phones have really, I'm sorry, but they've cheapened photography. Anybody can take a picture. These things they're incredible. I mean, they're autofocus, auto exposure. You can correct all your problems with little apps on it. You can transmit things to people across the world instantaneously. It's crazy. So really kind of in a fantasy time, but it's lowered the bar and it's really democratized aerial photography.
So in a way, that sounds like a mixed bag. It's the democratizing part is kind of good, or can be. The quality control is kind of sad.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I'm really excited about the new things it lets me do. I can take pictures with the drone that I couldn't have taken otherwise. There are a lot of pictures in this new book that are taken with the drone, and I wouldn't want to be flying low over a confined animal feed yard. In fact, the first one I flew over, I actually got arrested for that too. But I was very nervous flying over that because the motor quit. I would have been sliding around in cattle manure and had a very angry rancher coming down on me. So the drone, it opens up new places. So I try to look at the positive and what I can do with the situation. And right now I'm really excited about what drones let me do.
So I'm going to show some scenes from the book, and just so people know, we're going to be talking for about excuse me, about 20 more minutes, and then we're going to switch over to Instagram. And your account is Geo Steinmetz.
Correct. Yeah. If you my followers, I got about 1 million followers, but it should pop up in your screen. If you follow her, you can go and look at that account. And yeah,
that's a pretty impressive posse you've got there. So let's
seals. Yeah, these are Cape fur seals in Namibia. This was done with the glider. It would have been easier with the drone because the drone's a lot quieter. But with the seals in the glider, basically I had one pass because they were all kind of lazing around in the morning, trying to warm up. The water's very cold there, and they were kind of digesting their fish. And when I went down to the beach, they kind of, to be honest, they kind of panicked and they all ran for the sea. And so I had one pass because they all went into the ocean. The beach is about 1 mile long. So I had one run down that beach, and you had to get it right. And if the motor, I was really nervous because you're flying, and this is about 50 feet above the seals. And if my motor had quit, which it does fairly often, I would have landed, and the seals would have gotten tangled in the parachute lines. And those are big seals. They would have dragged me into the ocean, and I would have drowned because they would have been so freaked, and they get caught up in the parachutes like a fishing net. And off I would go to sea with a 100-pound motor on my back. So and it got so low I could smell those guys. They have really bad breath. But it smelled like seal breath and seal poop. I also want to say that I'm not like an animal terrorist. I mean, seals. I mean, there are lions in Namibia that come down and predate on them, and they panic from time to time. I just happened to I was the morning panic.
That's amazing to think. Can you just remind people where this is? Namibia is not a part of Africa that's on a lot of people's radar outside of.
Yeah, Namibia it's on the Atlantic, in the Southern Atlantic. So it's above South Africa. It's one country up in South Africa. So if you think of Africa as kind of like a big, like a big mitten, it would be about like here on the mitten, like about there.
Right. And was it logistically? You said something again that was disturbing to me. You seem to be pretty blasé about the idea that your motor quits quite often. I don't know. That seems like a big deal to me, not like my motor quits.
Well, the thing is, it does sound to people who aren't accustomed to this kind of aircraft, it sounds crazy, but the glider, you always turn the motor off before you land. because you don't want when you come into land. Let me get the glider. I'll show you.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Here's a model of my rig that was made for me by a kid in Niger. Okay, and so when you're flying, and when you let me get the right, it's everything's backwards here. So when you stop the motor and you run in the ground, the wing collapses on top of you, and all the lines will fall on top of you. And you do not want the lines falling into a moving propeller. And so as you're coming in about like 50 feet above ground, you kill the motor, and then you just glide in because you're flying. I mean, most of the things like you stop the motor in aircraft, you're going to crash, but here you're flying the wing, you just glide down. And so, and so if the motor quits, it just means you're not going to get killed. You're just going to be landing soon. And you always have to fly so that you can coast to a landing. And over the seals, I'm breaking that rule. I don't want to land in the seals. So you can bend the rules, but you just do it. You want to do that very occasionally. Otherwise, you're not going to live very long. So you just feel like, does this seem reasonable? Do I feel lucky? Does the motor seem good? And then you do that. And most of the time, you're right. So far, I've been right.
So far, well, let's see some more imagery here. This was in, do you recall this area? And these geological formations are amazing.
Yeah, those are zebras. And here again, I mean, I was taking advantage. The zebras, like the seals, they're kind of nervous. They have predators, typically lion, cheetah here, and so they will spook. And they were they were all grazing, and then with me flying, they went for a trot amongst the fairy circles. Here we got a question from Phoebe Pearson. Hi, Phoebe.
Yep.
Yeah, my camera equipment has evolved over time. Now I used to work with film, and now I'm working with digital cameras. It's a little bit easier because I don't have to change rolls of film, changing stuff in the air. You don't really want to have a camera open and the dust gets inside. And so with the big memory cards, I never run out of pixels. And so it is easier now. And also with the digital image, you can take pictures in kind of crummy light, and I don't like to do too much Photoshop, but you can make the light look a little better in Photoshop. So life is easier now. Yeah.
I remember when I was a young guy in my early 20s traveling on a fellowship overseas, and I had my cameras, and your whole dynamic of how you thought about taking pictures changed because you had 36 shots and I had maybe 10 rolls with me for a month or two. And, it was kind of like always just maybe. And now with the digital, that part of the decision-making is just not there digitally anymore.
Yeah, I mean, like this picture of the elephants is over Lake Ambassade. This is another place where you really don't want the motor to fail.
No.
Because the elephants are standing in about 3 feet of water, 3 or 4 feet of water, and then they wouldn't. I think if you let the emergency land there, they would not be amused, and you couldn't outrun the elephants in a swamp.
Yeah.
But anyway, before you do a pass this, you would check the camera and make sure that you weren't on frame 34, because you would typically go in and I'd be using a motor drive going ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching as I get closer and closer to the elephants, and then if you get too low, even the elephants would get a little bit peeved, and they would kind of, because they were young, the mothers are there with their young, and they would trumpet at me, and I realized, okay, I'm pissing off the elephants. I got to stay a little higher. But elephants in a national park like that, they were actually quite chill. They know they're safe, so it was they don't really have predators out there.
I'm just going to scroll through here a little bit.
I mean, the pictures in the book it's a mixed bag. This is taken from the ground. There's some that are taken from helicopters, some with drones, some with planes. But a lot of the desert work was done with the glider.
Astounding. Is there now the book, The Human Planet, again, which I wrote the text for? It's kind of amazing. It's a beautiful portrait of our planet, and I love the fact that you had articulated with the publisher the idea that this is a portrait of the dawn of the Anthropocene, the dawn of the human age, meaning that we're not done yet. We could still make things better or worse. That part of it really captured my attention, and that's why I dove into helping with the writing.
Well, you did a wonderful job. I mean, putting it's crazy because you and I are the same age, and so I mean, when we were kids, I mean, do you remember Earth Day 50 years ago?
Vaguely.
To me, these issues didn't really become apparent until I started going out in the field and seeing the impact we were having. Like, can you go back at the last picture you had of the lakes?
Yeah.
These are lakes in the Central Sahara, and the lakes are they're supplied with spring water that fell as rain in the last ice age. Like 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was a savanna, and the lakes are hypersaline, but you have freshwater springs all around that support the palm trees. And when I saw this, like, wow, it's like to think that Sahara was that was a savanna. I'd see like rock art out there, and it's like, wow, that there used to be, crocodiles and hippos in the Sahara. And it makes you realize that geologically speaking, we're in this little, we're just one little point in a spectrum, and we're rapidly going towards another point in the spectrum. But the problem, I think, is that we're going at it very rapidly, and it's difficult for everything to evolve and keep up with that.
Yeah, let's go into the section of the book that you called Harvest. This is the exploitation of the planet. I'll scroll through a few, and then we can talk a little bit, because we're going to run short of time. Again, extraordinary, especially in Asia, where there's been such a long history of multi-thousand-year tending of the landscape and terracing and the like. It's just incredible. But you go through the world now, we still have a pretty small footprint overall. Much of two-thirds of the world is the ocean, and we have a footprint there powerfully now in terms of CO2 changing the chemistry of the sea. And
I saw a statistic recently that something like 40% of the Earth's surface, of the land surface, is being converted to agriculture.
Right.
It's pretty extraordinary when you think of, basically, that isn't, the Antarctica is off limits, and some of these hyper regions in in Africa and the Middle East are off limits, and the Himalayan plateau, you can't really grow much there. And so basically most of the arable land we've taken, and now to feed the insatiable appetite of the planet, we're moving into areas where agriculture is really not very sustainable. Like you're moving into like deforesting the Amazon, where the soils are very thin. Most of the biomass there is actually above ground. And so when you cut down the forest, within a year or two, the soil is really poor, and you have to be importing fertilizer, and it's just not, it's not a good long-term proposition.
And here you're showing kind of the inverse, which is interesting. By intensifying agriculture, a lot of us recoil from the idea of industrialized agriculture, but it can actually take the pressure off of forest and the like. If you grow more stuff with less land, you can change that formula.
You can, but it's complicated because these things all require like chemical fertilizers and a lot of inputs, like,
inputs and outputs.
Can you go back one picture?
Sure.
I mean, like this farm on the right, this is right near me in Newark, New Jersey, and it's the world's largest. I think it's the world's largest indoor farm. But my understanding is they're not really making any money on it because it costs so much for all the air handling, electricity, and when you have a vertical farm like that, it's more the heat rises and it's more humid, and so you start having mold and you have all these problems. So they can grow the stuff, but it's a lot cheaper to grow it in Yuma and truck it in, even to Newark.
Yeah, we had a couple of failed experiments like that in the Hudson Valley too. It is a tough challenge right now.
Yeah.
And here's
one. Can you go back one? I like talking these pictures, but go back one more. Like on the left, that's a hydroponic system they did in Japan, and that was after Fukushima, when they wanted to grow local produce, but they couldn't because the land had all been poisoned by the nuclear.
Very interesting.
And so here they could grow locally, but their inputs, I mean, you have to have a fertilizer and mine the stuff. And here they just had they didn't have to have severe air handling because it was a small system with it was like one of those little those little inflatable tennis structures, those kind of inflatable bubbles. And so they could grow year round, and they had daylight, but they still had to have a lot of fertilizer and keep turning it. And they, I think in Japan, it might have been economic in the winter, but it certainly wasn't in the summer.
Right. So we have just a couple more minutes, really. We're going to go over to Instagram. This will be the shortest Sustain What episode yet, but we can always do another one. Look at that terracing there, that nearly vertical side of that mountainside. Is that
Germany? Those fields are planted by the Romans. They've been so it's very, very sustainable. Wine likes rocky. They like that stony, well-drained soil. But because the Germans, they don't. I mean, they built a little funicular railway to get the grapes out because they can't get people who want to carry this up and down the hill like the Romans did.
It's incredible. I think if anyone came to that photo fresh, they would assume it was somewhere in Asia. So it's really impressive to think of the Roman imprint on the land is still visible in parts of Germany.
And I think we should switch our Instagram. It's
Yeah.
gonna take a couple minutes to do that. I think we're supposed to start Instagram live at 1:30.
Yeah, I know.
If
So
you
I encourage
conversation, you can go to my account. It's GEO, like geography, GEO Steinmetz.
right.
And I think also if you go into Andy's, Andy, what's your account?
There you are right there. People, I'll leave that on the screen. So if people come while we're moving over, they can do that.
Okay.
So it's great to have a brief moment with you here on Sustain What, and now we will switch over to Instagram.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see here. All right, so I'm going to stay on here while we try this. For those of you who are coming to the screen right now, I'm going to go on to Instagram with George. I'm Andrew _Revkin on Instagram. George is Geo Steinmetz. He's got 1 million followers there. So that's why it's worth spending some of the time I have today with him on Instagram. Kind of hard to believe that National Geographic has 100 million followers, but so for one photographer to have 1 million is pretty awesome. So let's see. He should be logging in there in a minute. And I'll keep scrolling through the book a little bit here too, just in case you come late. And I will be ending the broadcast in a few minutes. So this is sort of an unusual multimodal version of what I'm trying to do. Again, George Steinmetz and I will be connecting on Instagram shortly. Let me see where he is. What a wacky world. Hey, Kyo Chow. Yes, meet me on Instagram. George is Geo Steinmetz. You can see right there. Geo Steinmetz on Instagram. I'm going to find him right now too as well. I think he'll be live there shortly. Stay tuned. Oops. So I'm going to sign off here for all you Sustain Waters. We'll move over to Instagram. Andrew _Revkin is me. I'll be speaking there with George Steinmetz, the photographer, who you can see here. He's Geo Steinmetz on Instagram. GeoSteinmetz. And thanks for coming to this abbreviated segment of Sustain What?